This week, Newsmakers welcomes Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio. He is the new chairman of the Republican Study Committee. And Congressman, for our viewers, it's really the in-house think tank for conservatives. Is that fair enough to describe that way?
I mean, look, the RSC is supposed to be the conservative conscience on Capitol Hill. That's what our caucus is about, 170-some members strong, 70-some of the freshman class are members of RSC. I like to think we're the old Dick Armey line. Dick Armey had, I think, an appropriate line when he said, when we act like us, we win. When we act like them, we lose. Our job at RSC is to make sure Republicans act like us. And I think when we do that, not only is it good for Republicans and what we stand for and what we're supposed to be about, but I really believe it's good for America when we do the things that we told the voters we were going to do when we ran for the job. So that's the mission of RSC, and we're all about making sure we adhere to the mission.
Well, let me introduce our two reporters who will be questioning you this week. Russell Berman is right next to me. He is a congressional reporter for The Hill, and Jonathan Allen is returning to Newsmakers this week. He covers Congress for Politico. Jonathan, we're going to start with you.
Congressman, I wanted to get you to talk a little bit more about your view of the role of the RSC. You look right now, you've got a caucus that's almost as big as the Democratic Party in the House right now. Is what you're trying to do hold Speaker John Boehner's feet to the fire before bills get to the floor? Or is it all right to tear them down, too, once they get there?
No, look, you saw the way RSC, the way we want to operate last week, and you saw, I think, our leadership do the right thing last week as well. I've been impressed with our leadership's willingness to allow this, and you guys are following this today, this open process that we have not only is bringing amendments to the floor, but an open process within the conference. And over the last couple of weeks, we've seen it play out relative to the CR, the continuing resolution, which will fund the government for the rest of this fiscal year. They had a good bill that they brought to the conference that was kind of leadership and appropriations committee working on. Good start, good piece of legislation, but frankly, we thought it should be a little bit better. We went to work talking about why we thought we needed to get to $100 billion in savings for taxpayers. And to the leadership's credit, they moved there. And so I think you saw this thing play out the way it's supposed to in a legislative body, where you have this open process where members can, get your best hold, take your best shot, bring your best argument, and if you can carry the day, you're gonna be successful and have that as part of the legislation, both in the conference and now we're seeing on the floor of the House of Representatives where members are bringing amendments. So that's the way RSC is going to behave. We're going to tell them what we're for, we're going to fight for it, and we're going to push it in the right direction.
Even if that means sometimes taking bills down on the floor?
Well, we haven't got there. And what I saw last week was not taking a bill down, but making a good bill a lot better. There were several of us who spoke at conference. There were several freshmen, and this freshman class is just strong. And they spoke at conference and told the leadership and the other members that they think it's important we get to $100 billion in savings for the taxpayer, and this bill's going to get there. So that's the way you'd like to operate, and that's what we plan to do.
Before you leave that thought, let me ask you, because past speakers have come in talking about open processes and then quickly after experience kind of carve things down a little bit. And I'm wondering, after seeing 500-plus amendments this week to this piece of legislation, whether this will be the beginning of the end of open legislation.
Well, RSC is going to advocate that we keep this open process. I can guarantee that we think it's important. The founders, in their wisdom, when they set up this great experiment in liberty we call America, the greatest country ever, they wanted the House of Representatives, in particular, the House of Representatives, to be closest to the people. What better way than the representative, the 700,000 plus people in the respective districts send to Washington, what better way to have this body close to the people than to let every member bring their best idea? Take your best shot and see if you can get 218 votes and pass something. I think that's the way America's supposed to work in the kind of system we have. And RSC will certainly be advocating for that. If you've watched the number, a lot of RSC members have brought amendments, and we've been successful. Freshman Mike Pompeo from Kansas has already won a few amendments to reduce spending even more. Tim Walberg won an amendment to reduce spending relative to the National Endowment for Arts. So you're seeing freshman members grab a hold of this concept and bring their ideas. I think that's great. I think the American people like that.
Talking about the spending debate that's ongoing right now, the House and the Senate are now sparring over this continuing resolution, and John Boehner has now said that if it comes down to having to do a short-term continuing resolution, if the parties can't agree by March 4th when the funds extend, that he will not do a short-term extension at the current levels of spending. From your perspective,
that's great.
But does that mean? Does that mean that a government shutdown is on the table then? Is this upping the ante?
I don't think it means that at all. I think it means that John Boehner as our speaker, and our conference understands what the election was about on November 2nd. Now think about this. If we would just continue to kick the can down the road and do a short-term CR for a couple weeks, or maybe even 4 weeks, a month or so, and continue to spend at the current levels, that's agreeing to what the Democrat House, the Democrat Senate, and the Democrat administration put together last year. This election in November was all about not agreeing to that. So there is no way that we can agree to continue to fund the government at the current levels. We have to achieve some savings for the American people. So I think the Speaker is spot on when he makes that statement, and that's what we're all about doing. And I think the American people understand that.
But does that mean that that a shutdown could be acceptable? If the Democrats are just going to go to the wall on this? I mean, this neither side really seems to want to talk about this, but that is the consequence of not getting something agreed upon, right?
I think the Democrats will see things our way. I mean, think about this, and you guys have been covering this. Have you ever seen the Appropriations Committee cut tens of billions of dollars? Now $100 billion from what the President requested last year. Have we ever seen that? I mean, this is a whole new world. And you really think the Democrat, now we'll find out in 2 weeks, but do you really think the Democrat Senate, with all these Democrat senators up for re-election in 20 months, 22 months, do you really think they're going to say, no, we're going to thumb our nose at the American people. We're going to keep spending just like we have been spending? I just don't see it. I think they have to agree to reduce, because, look, it's mathematics. We're going broke. You have to change things. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to see things our way. Now, will they see things our way clear to $100 billion? We'll see. But let's hope it moves that.
But when when have they seen things their way before? I mean, that's what what it's come down to.
It's a whole new world. People say this all the time. I'd say, look, we might think the Senate's not going to reduce spending, but it's a whole new game. And there are, I always use the analogy, every Friday night in the fall we have high school football, and many times there's one team that's, heavily favored, and everyone says, oh, there's no way this other team can win. They still kick the ball off. They still play the game. And sometimes the underdog wins. So we're kicking the ball off over there, and we're going to say, look, this is what the American people expect. We expect you to play the game, and who knows, we may in fact win. We could in fact get $100 billion in savings. Is it likely? Probably not. But I think we're going to get some savings.
Can I fast forward a little bit to the fiscal 2012 budget? Because right now we're looking at appropriations and some cutting there on domestic discretionary accounts. That's big for that pot, but it's a small pot. Paul Ryan, the budget chairman, has said that he will look at reforming Medicare and Medicaid in that budget, and Social Security is on the table. What do you think are the right ways to do that? Is the roadmap that he laid out the way to go? What's necessary in your mind from a fiscal 2012 budget?
And Paul is the resident expert on those matters. I think the concepts of that are in his roadmap. The concept, look, it's consistent with American principles. The concept of moving to an empowerment model, empowering younger Americans to have greater control of their health care dollars, that's the model that makes sense. It's the model that's consistent with America. And that's where he wants to go. And he's exactly right. He says people who are at or near retirement age, they should be able to stay in the exact same system because they have made decisions based on that system. They have structured and done things in their life because they knew these were the rules, these were the parameters in place. So, but for younger Americans, to save Medicare, to save Social Security, to make those systems work better, to keep our promise to Americans, we have to change. We just have to change. So Paul is on target, and I think you're going to see real reform in Medicaid, and I think it's likely we see some reform in Medicare to save those systems, make them more efficient and better for the people who use them, and also, probably most importantly, put us on a path that's actually sustainable and that will keep us from going bankrupt. You
said what we're going to see, very likely Medicaid, possibly Medicare.
I think so, yeah.
What's imperative to you to be able to support an FY12 budget? Do you have to have both Medicaid and Medicare? And you didn't mention Social Security.
Well, Social Security doesn't have the financial concerns that the other two have in the short-term range. So we have to make sure we meet our promise with Social Security. Everyone understands. This is a sacred contract the government's made with its people. We have to honor that. But the more pressing issues are Medicaid and Medicare, and frankly, the dollars. The bigger dollars are in those two elements when you're thinking about our budget situation. So what I think is important is we get on a path to balance. And I think that it's important that we get to a balanced budget in a reasonable period of time. And I always use the comparison, think about the average family who's got they're in a big financial mess. they know they can't get out of it in a year or two, but it also shouldn't take 50, 60, 70 years. Like the president's budget would never have us get to balance, would never have us begin to pay down the debt. 14 highest deficits in American history are the last 4 years and the next 10 years under the president's plan. So the Americans understand that won't work. What you have to have, I think most importantly in the 2012 budget, is a plan to get you to balance within a reasonable period of time. I would argue that's typically defined as the budget window, the 10-year window. So let's get to balance there, because remember, just getting to balance, we still got to pay down the debt. As we get on this path to balance, the debt still goes up. And under President Obama's plan, under a conservative plan like I'm advancing here, we're still going to have the debt going up. We're still going to have to pay that off at some point. So we got to get to balance as quickly as we can. That I think makes common sense, and that would be accepted by the American people.
I want to talk to you about positioning. Last Sunday on the Sunday Show, Speaker Boehner in an interview said that the case has to be made to the American people about how important this is. Lacking the White House, how does the Republican Party make the case to the public?
I think they've already gotten it. I think they already understand. I think the bigger question is, will the political class demonstrate the courage that the American people have demonstrated over the last year in saying, we understand it. There was a great column that Tony Blanchard put together 2 months ago in the Washington Times, and the title of his column is called The American Miracle. And he talks about what took place in 2009 and how no other people on the planet would have reacted the way the American people did. And it's, I think, very powerful. And he wrote it better than I can say it. But his point was that in early 2009, everybody was scared. Our 401ks had lost value. Our homes had lost value. Many Americans had lost their jobs. The greatest corporation in ever, General Motors, was going bankrupt. Everyone was nervous. And along come this very popular president at the time and said he was going to do the thing that government always tries to do. He was going to do the same old, same old. He was going to have bailouts. He was going to have this failed stimulus package. He was going to promise that the government would do it all. And then an amazing thing happened. The American people said, you know what? We're not going. We will forego the so-called protection of the state, and we will embrace liberty. It was an amazing thing to watch, from the town halls to the Christie election, to the November 2nd election, the Scott Brown election, to the judge's decision on health care regarding the individual man. Amazing thing happened in the country. And the American people basically said, we're willing to do the tough things if it means a better future for our kids and our grandkids. Amazing. No other people, Blankley's line, no other people in the world would have made that decision. They embraced liberty, and they said, we will forego any type of protection from the government. And I think in my time in public life, I have never seen the American people more receptive for the tough decisions that have to be made. The real question is, are the politicians, do they have the courage to do the right thing? Do we have the discipline to do the right thing? And you're going to see that play out over the next 6 months. But so far, it's been good with this CR and where we've moved it.
About halfway through.
Going back into some of the internal House Republican politics, excuse me, Michelle Bachmann is leading the Tea Party caucus in the House. They're going to have their first meeting after this upcoming recess. They're expected to have a lot of new members among the freshmen. They already had 50 before this election. How do you see the Republican Study Committee and the Tea Party caucus differing on policy?
I don't. I mean, I just frankly don't. Look, what Michelle's doing is great. I would venture to guess, although I have not compared membership lists, I would venture to guess that every member of the Tea Party is also a member of the RSC. The Tea Party they're the energy in politics right now, and they've provided a great service to this country in highlighting the fiscal situation and how serious it is. And so I applaud their efforts. I was on a conference call with Tea Party leaders in our state last night. I appreciate tremendously what they're doing. And they have made a difference. They have made a difference in some of those elections I talked about: Chris Christie, Bob McDonald, Scott Brown, and of course November 2nd. And they're going to continue to play a big role.
So how do you see both caucuses, working in the House? Is there a need to have two then? I mean,
Well, I think we're going to work great together, and we work great together. I mean, Michelle Bachmann, for example, she attends RSC meetings. She's been at RSC meetings. She's talked about legislation she's fired up about and interested in. So to be honest, it's not something I think about, because it's two groups working for the same goal.
Can I ask you about your views on the size and scope of government? And what you think is the appropriate level? Is there a way to qualify, talk about what the role is? I assume you believe there should be some, and it's too much now.
No.
So what is the appropriate role for government in American society?
You start with the Constitution, and obviously the Constitution talks about, one of the things we're supposed to do with your tax dollars is protect the country. So obviously national defense is something we focus on. And there are many of us in RSC who, if you look at the CR, we focused on non-defense discretionary spending because we think we are supposed to have money in national defense for our troops, for our men and women in uniform, for the protection of America. So obviously you do that. But I think if you look at just general trends, the idea that we're now at 25% of GDP, government spending, is at 25% of GDP, is just way too high. Historically, we've been at 20, 18, 17, 19, in that range, and in extraordinary times it goes up, like World War II. But where we are now is unprecedented, and the fact that the President, in his budget outline that he introduced earlier this week, is going to continue that trend of having government as such a big percentage of GDP is just, I think, dangerous. So I think you can look at that from an economic standpoint, and then obviously you look at the Constitution and say national defense is where we need to focus your dollars.
Let me ask you beyond that. Obviously, the military is involved in national defense, and we've got this new Homeland Security department that's involved and engaged in that. Are there other forms of sort of national security? I mean, we've seen in these budget cuts the COPS program. We've seen firefighter cuts, and some of that's been restored through the amendment process.
There's supposed to be local things that the federal government decided to supplement. So there's supposed to be locally funded issues there.
So in your mind, the federal government wouldn't be giving money to local police departments?
No, you're missing. Here's the fundamental question that we have to ask, and the American people have already figured out the answer to this. We don't have the money. I mean, so when people, because we're getting calls to our office, well, Jim, what about this great program? It helps kids. What about this great program? It helps. And the answer, it may be a great program, but the answer is, we're broke. I mean, you can't do it. It's like the family making $50,000 who's spending $80,000 a year. Some of what they're spending that extra $30,000 on are good things. Maybe they're taking the kids. Maybe every Friday night they have this family night where they go out as a family. Good things happen. They go out to dinner. They go watch a good movie. It's all good stuff. But you know what? They can't afford it. They have to make choices. That's exactly the situation the federal government's in, only it's worse for us because we've been taking in 50, spending 80 year after year after year, and what the president proposed was to do it for the next 10 years at that crazy rate. So when you break it down to the way the typical family, the typical small business owner has to look at this, it's like, yeah, there are great things we're spending money on. The COPS program, it probably is helping police officers, it probably is helping firefighters to firefight. Those are all good things, but you know what? We can't do it. We just can't do it. Because if we continue, it all falls in, and then we can't get back to doing what we're supposed to do, which is protecting the country, which is spending money on those things that are truly a national interest. So that's why we have to begin to scale back, and that's why the RSC is completely focused on, look, it's not easy. Politicians, think about it. Everyone loves to spend money. Politicians get to spend other people's money. So it's not like it's fun to be cut. But it has to be done, and that's what we have to focus on.
I look only at one side of the ledger. The RSC looks only at spending, and as I said, it's not going to vote for, and I think each of the individual members probably also have said they're not going to be supportive of any tax increases of any kind. Why look only at the one side of the ledger if things are out of balance?
Great question. Because to truly deal with the numbers we're talking about, 14 trillion, I mean, we've got a $1.6 trillion deficit, and the president has $1 trillion deficits for the next 10 years. Some years it drops below $1 trillion, but it averages, So to truly deal with what we're talking about, you have to have economic growth. We can do all the good savings and reduce programs and focus in because we're going broke. But we also have to be cognizant of this simple truth. You've got to have a growing economy. You cannot there's no way we're going to be able to pay down this debt in the long run if we don't have economic growth. And you don't get economic growth by further penalizing and taxing the job creators, the small business owners, the entrepreneurs, the families who decide to start. If you keep taxing them, like the president is fixated on doing with this $250,000 and above, which is going to hit so many small business owners, if you keep doing that, you're not going to get the growth you need to get out of this. And plus, you just frankly diminish the future that our kids and our grandkids are going to have. So there is a balance, I get it, but that's why we got to keep the tax rates low. And frankly, we should be looking to lower certain tax rates. The one good statement the president's made in the last month is talking about reducing the corporate tax rate. I actually think it's almost a patriotism issue now because The fact that American companies have the highest corporate tax rate, one of the highest in the world, and have to compete with others who have a lower one, it just doesn't make sense.
Do you anticipate there will be comprehensive tax code reform this year? Or is it just too much to tackle?
I would like that. I think that would help. You know, just talk about economic growth, and that would certainly help. A lower tax rates, a simplified system would all be conducive to economic growth and job creation. But the big focus, frankly, over the next 6 months is going to be the spending issue. Because, I mean, I don't know, in the times I've been watching the federal government, where we've ever had this CR, maybe multiple CRs, budget, debt ceiling, 12 appropriation bills relative to the 2012 budget, all between now and August, when the August recess. So it is going to be every single week talking about how we're going to achieve savings for the American people and put this budget on a path that is sustainable.
Picking up on one of the issues you mentioned that's coming up is the debt ceiling. The President has asked Congress to raise the debt limit. John Boehner has said it's going to have to come with significant spending cuts or reform. What, from the RSCs and your perspective, I mean, what does that look like? Yeah. What do you need to see? We haven't finalized that. I mean, I'll be frank. We're looking. I talked with a colleague of mine today. I said, you know what? Next week, we've been so focused on the CR, and frankly, now it's the order I anticipated happening is CR and budget. So we're beginning to move into the budget. But I said we've got to reach some kind of agreement on what we think is needed if, in fact, conservatives are going to consider that. Because the truth is, conservatives aren't going to raise the debt ceiling unless it is something really good for taxpayers and really helps put us on this path I've been describing. It is, in my mind, just that important. So we don't know. Are there a couple of key options on the table?
Well, you know, the things we hear, but it's all general, and this is where we have to hone in on the specifics. We think serious spending cuts with the bill itself, and structural and process reforms as we go forward, whether that's spending caps, whether that's, you know, spending as a percentage of GDP, whether that's a balanced budget amendment. There are lots of things being talked about, but we think it's you know, quickly becoming the time where we have to focus in and say, we think this makes sense if, in fact, that's going to happen.
Well, very specific. We have about 4 minutes left, and that's public broadcasting funding. In the 1990s, a coalition very successfully turned around an earlier effort to cut funding for public broadcasting. It was a big Save Big Bird campaign. Once again, the supporters are mobilizing. Who's going to win the battle this time?
Look, I think we will. And again, I come back to the point. The country's gone broke. There might be some, you know, Sesame Street may be a wonderful thing. I used to watch it when I was a kid. I remember probably when it started in the 70s when I was in grade school. So maybe wonderful, but look, we don't have the money. And if you don't begin to address it and put everything on the table and say, we introduced our Spending Reduction Act 4 weeks ago to achieve savings in non-defense discretionary spending over the decade. And we listed, I think, close to 100 programs we felt needed cut, including this one. And we said, guys, it's all got to be on the table because we just don't have them. You can't keep doing the same old and expect some kind of new result. You can't do it. You can't keep spending more than you take in. Every American gets that. Every family gets that. Every small business owner gets that. Why in the world can't the political class in Washington get that?
Mr. Allen, last question.
I can go back to something you just said. You said the president, and you agree with him on this, wants to lower corporate tax rates. Implicit in what he wants to do also is to ensure that all corporations are paying taxes. And the idea being that if everyone's paying, you can lower the rates. And what I wonder is that something that is also an area of agreement for you?
Depends, because the president also said revenue neutral. So that's just shuffling everything. What we really want is to lower the corporate tax burden on the job creators so that they can better compete with our competitors around the planet, and in so doing attract more jobs to America, which will, in fact, bring in more revenue because you have economic growth. That's the whole point. So this revenue neutral concept I have problems with, but bringing down the corporate rate, and if that means there are certain, you know, what in the president's vernacular, loopholes that need to be fixed, okay, I guess. But let's look at, but the key is bringing down the overall rates that companies in this country are paying so they can better compete with companies in other countries.
So you want that whole revenue stream to come down a little bit for the short term in the hope of greater economic growth that will then create greater revenue.
You said it exactly right, except for the word hope. I don't think there's any hope to it. I think historically it happens when in fact you lower the tax burden on people who create jobs. More jobs are created, and over time, you generate more revenue, which can be used for some of the very programs you're all talking about.
Ms. Berman, your final question.
Any other issues, that you can think of where there is an opportunity to work with the president beyond the corporate tax rate?
Well, I'll have to look. We'll have to look. Nothing comes to mind right now because as we analyze his budget, we so disagree with the direction he took his budget. And you know, just philosophically, the president and I aren't on the same page. But maybe the corporate tax rate is one.
Well, that's it for our time. Thank you very much for being with us. Appreciate
Pleasure
it.
being with you. Thank you.